All right, it looks like we are live. Welcome everyone to the first ever happy hour with Dirk, trying to answer a few of the burning questions about classical and orchestral music. Now, bear with me, this is the first time that I'm doing anything like this, so if there's technical catastrophes, it's not my fault. But I am very happy that I am supported today and helped out by two wonderful ladies that I work with, one in Minnesota, in Duluth, Minnesota, and one in Augusta, Georgia. We have Melissa from Duluth and Camelia from Augusta. Welcome to the show, ladies. Hi.
Thank you.
Both of these wonderful ladies work with the orchestras that I work with in Duluth and in Augusta in sort of our marketing and social media responsibilities and jobs, and they are really great assets. We're lucky to have them. And today I'm lucky that they will help me out with this Q&A session here. So we have a lot of questions already. If you have questions that you would like to ask today, then please do so by just commenting here on the stream. And in the interest of time, we have combined a few questions today. And so if you don't hear your exact question, I hope you will forgive us. Now, since this is, of course, a musical happy hour, make sure to grab your favorite local drink. And ladies, what do you got?
I've got Bent Paddle Black.
Bent Paddle Black, Bent Paddle, great brewery in Duluth, Minnesota, of course. And Camelia, what do you got?
I have a smoothie in an Augusta Symphony cup.
Augusta Symphony cup, perfect, perfect. I myself, of course, could not decide what to do, so I have the No Jacket Required from Savannah Brewing down here in Augusta. And at the same time, I'm also drinking a little bit of Vicre Gin and Tonic from my friends Joel and Emily up in Duluth, Minnesota. So let's get started with the first question. And the first question that I think we should talk about, because several of you commented on the video that I made a few days ago where I posed a question, what does this guy actually do up there? Because nobody is watching him. So why is he even there? And several of you said that I would like to hear the answer to that. So that seems to be a thing. So here's the thing. All orchestra members, they will look up if it's necessary, when it is necessary. And it's necessary not 100% of the time. It's necessary during transitions and so on, when you change from one tempo to the next, or when the character changes dramatically. That's when actually all the eyes will go up and people will watch. But nevertheless, it's not for naught that I'm waving my arms on the podium, because of course they can still see me even if they don't look into my eyes. So if you turn your head away from your screen, you can still see what I'm doing here. You can still see that I'm beating time, and you can still see if my movement is something like this, or if my movement is something more like this, something really rapid. So you can still see the basic elements, which of course are time and rhythm, and as well as articulation and phrasing. So, and of course, don't forget that one of the main parts of the job of the conductor is to run a rehearsal. Because if you imagine you have 80 musicians, they're all individuals, they're all musicians, they all have their own opinion about how something should go. If you try to figure that out, bring 80 people together and make everybody happy in a 2.5-hour rehearsal, that would be extremely, extremely difficult. So that's, of course, a big part of it as well. Let's continue on then. Melissa, I think we have something up from Duluth here coming up.
Yeah, so we had a question that kind of follows up with your conducting. So Carrie from Duluth asked, when you are conducting the symphony, are you following the score or do you have it memorized?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. It's sort of a mix, and it depends. Sometimes you really have it memorized, and I don't have an eidetic memory, so when I say memorized, I couldn't write every note down from memory, but I have the music memorized and I know who comes in when, so that I don't have to look at the score in order to actually conduct it. But it really depends on how well you know a piece, and then how much time you have to prepare. The more time you have, of course, the more you have it memorized. And some conductors only conduct from memory entirely, but I prefer to have a score usually, simply because if anything happens, it's very good to have a score in front of you.
Always, just in case.
Just in case, yeah.
And then we had some questions about attire. So Paula in Augusta asked, who decided that you wear different outfits to different concerts, such as tails for classical, suit for pops, etc.?
Right. That is usually a decision that's made. Technically, it's made by me or by the music director, but it's a decision where many people usually have a say in, because we want to get feedback, of course, how we come across on stage, and different series usually have different attires. So we wear either tails, white tie, or black tie, tuxedo for our main stage masterwork symphony type performances. But then for classical, for pop concerts, which are often more popular, the music is more popular, and they're more casual, I would say. We often wear simply black because it actually looks quite cool on stage when the entire orchestra is dressed in black. And it's just a little more of a casual approach. And actually, talking about how we dress on stage, it's a perfect segue to my first guests tonight, because our wonderful concertmaster in Augusta, Georgia, and our principal timpanist here in Augusta, they are from Russia, and they are exceptionally well dressers. So please say hello to Anastasia and Dennis.
Hello there.
Hello, everyone.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Very good, very good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to have you guys here. I hope you're doing okay in Athens. I guess you are in Athens, Georgia.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. And I actually got a few questions specifically that came in specifically for you guys. The first one we have comes from Atlanta, and it's a little bit of a personal question. I hope you don't mind that, but I think it's very interesting. How, guys, you're from Russia originally, both. How did you come to the US? What was the way that led you here?
Well, we both had different ways, which led us here. I think that the most important thing, you mentioned that we're both from Russia, is that we've met at the Yale School of Music while doing our master's program of all the places. But we came here during different times. I personally, my father had a dream for me to study at the Curtis Institute of Music. And that's where I was lucky to be accepted in 2002. And that's when my US journey started. And I think Anastasia can tell you about her journey.
Yeah, well, I came to Yale in 2008, and that's how we met. Even though, funny enough, theoretically, we could have met in Moscow because we had a lot of common friends, and potentially.
But you never met when you were in Moscow at the same time?
No.
New Haven, Connecticut. That's the place.
That's the place where it happens. Yeah.
And we actually met on stage before the orchestra rehearsal.
Yep.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, and now, of course, how you're married, the two of you, and how long have you guys been married?
It's going to be 10 years this July.
Oh, wow. That leads us to the second question I have for you guys here, which is kind of funny, but very true. Why is it that there are always so many marriages in orchestras? Like people that play in the same orchestra together, they end up marrying each other or hating each other. So it's either or.
I think there is an interesting, it's obviously an interesting question. It's not that people are starting marrying inside the orchestra. It's a lot of people who are actually married before, because our world is so small. We all meet at, music schools, so we start our journey early enough, and then we're actually lucky, to be together in one orchestra, because this is not quite a often happen situation. Nowadays it's really hard to be together, part of one orchestra.
Yes, yeah, and I know a lot of my friends actually play in orchestras in different cities, and I'm not talking within the same state. I know folks that play in
So
Detroit
we're lucky to
at the
be
same
here in
time.
Augusta, both of us.
Yeah. It can be very difficult. So it's very lucky, actually. It's very great if that happens. If that can happen. Here's a question from Amy in Duluth. Do you ever get distracted by the crowd or by a mistake? Either a mistake that you make or a mistake that somebody else makes. So in a performance situation, obviously.
Yeah, of course we do. I mean, crowd in Augusta Miller Theater is mostly inspiring. So I wouldn't say that I personally get distracted. Plus, I'm pretty far away. So I gain my inspiration from our audience rather than being distracted. And then as far as if someone makes a mistake, yeah, I mean, I think it's a natural thing, especially if you know the piece really well and you have a certain expectation in your mind how it's supposed to go, right? And then if something goes wrong, that can be very distracting, actually.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, at one of our concerts, there was a lady on the front row, and she was playing with her beads bracelet, and it takes a lot of concentration to really stay focused on your page of music, on the conductor and on the chamber music around you. So it just takes extra concentration, but
yeah. Things happen, of course. Dennis, here actually just a question came in from Summer. When we watch Dennis perform at the symphony, sometimes he leans his ear very close to the timpani. Why? What is he doing?
I'm tuning the drums, and I'm not just checking the pitch when I go lean like that. It's also I'm humming quietly into the drum, and when I do that, I'm reaching the note I need, and I hum into the drum. And then if I'm lucky, and if I got the note right with my humming, it will resonate back to me. So that's how I double check if I tune the drum in the correct way, especially when I have to do some tuning changes throughout the piece. Right. So this is something I'm used to, and I think it really works.
Absolutely. Yeah, many people maybe don't know that the timpani that Dennis plays, the big kettle drums, they're not necessarily just drums that don't change at all. They are very specific to the pitch. You can really have an exact pitch on each of those drums, and believe it or not, it's very obvious when those pitches are incorrect. But I remember your audition, Dennis, and that was one of the great things about your audition was just man, that pitch was perfect. So it was really great. Anastasia, this one's for you. Where is your favorite place to shop? Because you always have such beautiful dresses and shoes.
Wow, they're all different places. I like shop when I go somewhere internationally, let's say Europe, and they have the best shopping malls, especially in Italy. Yeah, but
so Italy. All right.
Currently it's not available.
It's online.
Yeah. Especially nowadays. I mean, of course.
Yeah. Okay, well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We have a little video that I would like to play. It's a short performance of your duet. You have a duet with, is it just marimba, or do you do all sorts of percussion, Dennis, in the duet?
It's mostly marimba and vibraphone with some other additions into that. So
right. And of course, violin as well. So what's the piece that we're going to be listening to?
That's a really cool piece, which was written for us by a friend friend of ours, Sheridan Seyfried. He's actually my schoolmate from the Curtis Institute. And it's called The Blues Train. And it was one of the earlier pieces we commissioned together. So we're really fond of that.
Great. Well, here it is, The Blues Train by Sheridan Seyfried. Anastasia, Dennis, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you for having us.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Anastasia and Dennis, for being on the show and for that little interlude there. Just got a question in here from, I can't find it now, but it was from somebody very young, and they're wondering why I use a stick when I conduct. Well, the answer is very simple, because if I have a stick in my hand, my movement becomes automatically much bigger. So a small movement like this really does not much, but if I do the same movement with a big baton, look at all the movement I can get out of that. So if I use a baton, my arms have to work a lot less. All right, Melissa, welcome back. Camelia, I think we have some questions here from up north, don't we?
Yes. Well, our next question is, why do some instruments, such as violins, get better with age, whereas others, such as pianos, tend to get worse with age?
Right. I think the basic answer to that is that what needs to be old is usually the wood of an instrument. So the older the wood is, the more resonant it becomes. That's why those old violins are so expensive, and that's what everybody wants to play, because that wood has a certain sound because it's so old. The same is probably true for, let's say, a piano as well. But the piano has the problem that it has a lot of mechanics in it, and those are the ones that go bad. So a 100-year-old violin is probably quite valuable. A 100-year-old piano, probably not. And I think it's mostly because of the mechanics of it. Actually, I think we had a question too. And Camelia, what do you think about? Camelia is also a violinist herself, and here's a question about Stradivarius violins. Why are Stradivarius violins still considered the best?
Yeah, so Stradivarius himself was a true master, but it also goes back to what you were saying about the wood a second ago. I've heard that scientists actually think the wood at the time of Stradivarius, which is late 1600s, early 1700s, there was something to do with the trees then that actually just made wood that was better for making violins back then. And I can vouch for that. Actually, when I was in college, I got to play a violin for an entire year that was made in 1687 by Grancino. And it was fantastic, and I really loved getting to play it. So definitely makes a difference.
You should have brought it home.
I know. So belonged to the university. They would not have been happy.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Oh, Melissa, you got something there?
I do. So Laura in Augusta is asking, she's curious about why there are certain instruments always in a symphony, like a clarinet, a cello, or a double bass, but a symphony never seems to have a saxophone, a harmonica, or an organ. If a harmonica player were to be added, would it still be considered a symphony?
Right. So Laura, the reason for that is that it's simply historical development. Some of the oldest wind instruments and brass instruments are the oboes. And the French horns and the timpani. Now, what they played in Mozart times those instruments were very different from what we use today, but those were the standard instruments back then, and that's what they wrote for. Haydn and Bach and so on, those were the instruments that were mostly available. So that's what they wrote for, and it became sort of standard to write for that group of instrument. And then, of course, time progresses, new instruments are being invented. Sort of in Mozart's time, the clarinet came around, and of course Mozart embraced it immediately. And his later symphonies, the orchestra includes flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, horns, trumpets, timpani, and of course strings as well. And so as time goes on, the orchestra gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the 19th century, we really see probably some of the largest orchestras, and then the beginning of the 20th century as well. But of course, all of those instruments that you mentioned, every now and then they do appear in a symphony orchestra. A saxophone, for example, there's several pieces that use saxophones. A very, very unusual one is harmonica. I give you that. But believe it or not, next season, the Augusta Symphony is actually performing a piece by Missy Mazzoli that includes 3 harmonicas on stage. And organ, every now and then, pieces will use organ. The biggest challenge with that, of course, is not every hall has an organ. And it's very difficult to do a piece than without, or then you have to rent an electrical one, and they never sound as good as they should. So it's simply a historical development, and a lot of pieces today use very, very unusual instruments. They have not, at least yet, become standard in the orchestra.
And the DSSO will see a banjo next season, so that's
there.
fun.
You go. Yes.
Another question about instruments. When you watched the New Year's concert from Vienna, the trumpets are sideways. Why and what are the differences between American trumpets and sideways trumpets?
Right. It's actually a very similar reason to what we just talked about. It's historically speaking, older trumpets were valve trumpets, and they are held sideways, and you push the valves like this, they come out, and you push the valves like this. And newer mechanics, so the newer instruments, they use pistons, they come up, and that's why you hold the instrument up and you push like that. Both of these have a little bit of a different sound. Many people say that the older trumpets, the valve trumpets, they sound a little rounder, a little warmer, and that's why many orchestras still play, especially certain repertoire, on these type of instruments. Camelia, what do you got there?
Yes. Our next question is, why
yes.
does the size of the symphony change with different pieces?
Right. So again, historically speaking, of course, we just mentioned that the orchestra grew over time. So Baroque music always will have a smaller orchestra than a big Mahler symphony. That's just because of the times. It's also, of course, what the composer wants and what the composer needs. So people like Wagner, for example, Wagner, often the orchestra can be 100, 120 people in the orchestra, but it's actually quite rare that he uses all 120 people at the same time. Very often he uses only a handful here, a handful there. But of course, what it does, it gives him all these different possibilities to connect different sounds, and then those combinations will create new sounds. And so it's really, it's A, the period of music that you're performing, and B, what the composer chooses to do and what they need at a certain moment. And since we're talking about instruments and instrumentation, that's a perfect segue to my next guest. He is a composer himself. He's originally from Uruguay, but has been in the United States for many, many, many years. I really enjoyed his music. I love performing it. His music combines this great classical tradition, the Western classical tradition, with all these wonderful rhythms and melodies from Latin America. So please welcome to the show, Miguel del Aguila. Miguel, here you are. Hi.
Hi, Dirk. Hi, guys.
Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us.
Having me.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think of you when we had these instrumentation questions, because that is one of the things that I really enjoy about your music. You really are a brilliant orchestrator. And so my first question I would like to ask you is actually about your orchestration. So when you write a piece of music, how do you determine who is going to play it? What instruments should play what line? What instruments should play the harmony, etc., etc.? So what's your process? Can it happen that maybe instrumentation at some point even comes first before the melody, or is it always the melody first and then the instrumentation?
You're right in some way. It doesn't come first, but instrumentation is part of the music when the music sounds in your head. So it's not that I decide this is going to be played by the oboe. When I get the entire music or melody, it already comes as an oboe sound. And what you have to manage when you're orchestrating is actually of a different, at least for me, everybody orchestrates different, but for me, you have to manage things like, well, I have the oboe busy playing this other part, or the oboe has played 20 bars with no rest, right? So, but in general, the music comes already dressed up in its own orchestration when you hear it. And
Right.
I do hear it before I start notating it. So it's not a conscious decision, really.
Right. I remember a few months ago when we saw each other, you were talking about the new piece that you're writing, and you were saying that you're writing it for a chamber ensemble, but really it comes to you as an orchestral piece, and you hear all these colors already, and you actually ended up orchestrating it because that's how the piece wanted to be.
It's a little scary because, there is a lot of mystery in composing. It's a complex process that not even composers understand, right? But sometimes I worry if I'm commissioned to write a piece for solo flute, and I start writing the piece for solo flute happily, and then I start hear a whole orchestra playing it, and you can't shut it off. It's like the music material that you create starts really taking over and telling you, I want to be this, I don't want to be that. And then you have to really, that's why very often I write many versions of the same piece, because the music tells me to do that. It's also good because it gets played more.
Right, of course. Yeah. We got a question here, a few questions actually that came in specifically for you. The first one here was, do you have any composers specifically that inspire you and your music?
Oh my gosh, like you as a conductor, at any time of my life, there was a different composer, right?
Yeah.
And for many reasons, when it comes to orchestrating, for example, I mean, who can look at Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe and not be inspired about an orchestra, right? Or Stravinsky. When it comes to, how a composer works in the 20th and 21st century, modern composers, I'm always inspired by Piazzolla, not only because I love his music, but to me, he's an example of a composer who went his own way. Regardless of what the rest of the world was doing, he didn't even care about not being accepted in the classical music world, right? He did his own same thing until he died, and I think that's so important when you create something, that you are just free to define your own field, really.
Right.
If you try just to fit the mold of what you're supposed to be, especially as a composer, you are already very limited.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I love the classics. I tend to love composers that are not everybody else's favorites. I love Saint-Saëns. I think he's a master at his craft.
Yes, another great orchestrator, by the way.
Yeah, Poulenc. There is some refinement in Poulenc that you just can't find in any other composer.
Yeah.
So
here's another interesting one that I thought was very interesting. So when you receive a commission from an orchestra, how does that work? Do you get perimeters and guidelines for this specific request, or are you completely free to do whatever you want?
I get practical guidelines. If it's for orchestra and there is a certain budget, of course I get the maximum orchestration. Usually I get a commission is to include in a program or a recording. So you get the maximum timing, give or take a few minutes. You get the timeline by which it has to be ready and parts ready. And very often musicians, especially for a recording and chamber music, they will tell you, I'm putting together a CD with this theme. So can you do something within that thematic? Or I'm putting, these are the other pieces on this CD, and I need you to write something to balance that. That's exactly the opposite. So that's pretty much all the request I get. Very often
the guidelines, right? Yeah.
I get very often I just, and then of course I do whatever I want.
But how long does it take you to write a piece? What would you say? Like,
this is not a job where you charge by the hour. Some works, which are not the most often ones, you dream of them, like Conga. I dream of it, and I woke up and the music was ringing, and I just wrote it. But for most works, you really there is a lot of planning involved before you write your first note. There is a lot of thinking. For me, it's all about the concept. So it can take me from 3 days to 6 months to write a piece.
Yeah.
And then there are some pieces that after 30, 40 years, I keep revisiting and changing, sometimes for the worst. So I do think, to the dismay of my publisher, that as long as I'm alive, my music is never finished.
Yeah.
Every time I look at it, it's like for performers.
Right.
You see a performance of you did when you were 20, and you listen to it and think, "Gosh, I need to change this and that and that." So for a composer, it's the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We look at a piece we wrote and we said, "How could I have done that? The solution is so easy. I need to do this and that."
Yeah. It's the same, certainly for us. Every time we go back to conduct a piece that we've done previously, you do something different. Absolutely.
That's why I always recommend performers, don't take too seriously what composers wrote on the page, because that was the composer that day. And then, like in the case of Beethoven, it wasn't even Beethoven. It was his own editors and publishers who thought they knew better than Beethoven, right? So I think it's just important to make music and make it your way, what
Yeah.
you think it should be. As
Yeah.
long as it makes sense, is good.
Right. You mentioned that concept is always very important for you, and I've put together a short little excerpt from one of your pieces. A few months ago, we recorded 2 pieces of yours with the Augusta Symphony Orchestra, and this is a short excerpt from one of them. The piece is called Giant Guitar. And the 3 short excerpts from that piece, you basically hear the same melody in a very different orchestration. And tell us a little bit about what we're about to hear, what the concept is behind that, and maybe how drastically orchestration can change the character of a melody.
Yes. I haven't heard your recording yet.
Oh,
So it will be
okay.
a first for me
It's the
too.
short flute
And I
in the
have
beginning.
no idea what clip you prepared with.
Okay.
But in general, I was commissioned to write a piece for John Faleta's guitar competition. So she asked, and I said, "Oh, I love writing for the guitar." When she said, "No, you cannot use a guitar," right? So there is a strange limitation. So I thought, okay, but it has to have as a theme a guitar. And I just thought, I'm going to use the orchestra as a giant guitar. And then as I start writing, I realized, to me personally, because the guitar is pretty much the instrument of Latin America, every time I hear a guitar, I get very nostalgic. And I hear, I start seeing, reliving things that happened when I lived in Latin America, in Uruguay, where I was born, right? So I start writing this piece, which obviously begins like a guitar, because the harmony you will see is the open strings of the guitar, right? So I start writing this piece, and immediately all memories of the bad things that happened in Uruguay and Argentina during the military dictatorship start coming to mind. So that's how the whole thing becomes pretty much a symphonic poem that tells a story of Latin American things that happened there. And I started using, it's very strange. It's like the music and the thematic influence the story of the music itself. I know that doesn't make any sense, but
Well,
I understand that.
Yeah. Well, the short excerpts I put together is we hear the theme first with just flutes, and I think you said once it's a theme from the Andes, right? Or that you could hear, like you imagine, like in the mountains, that very peaceful. And then that same theme throughout the piece becomes distorted more and more. So the middle excerpt is, I think it's mostly brass that has it there, and then we hear the very end of the piece, which is almost chaos. You police siren, everything, and that refers to those military revolutions that you were talking about.
The thing is, as I tell you, the piece itself influenced me as I was writing it, right? So it begins very peacefully, in a way high in the Andes. I never copy melodies. I never use folk melodies. All that is in my memory. So I use sort of the essence of what makes that music, what makes it sound that way, but it's my music. So as you can see, the piece becomes more and more intense, and more the orchestration and the music becomes more brutal and more violent, right? And that is this process that I went through when I was writing it, from beginning with a very delicate orchestration and sort of landscape, to really being placed in the middle of a
riot.
war, right?
Yeah.
A riot, and literally at the end, you hear what in my mind as I was writing it was gunshots to the people, and you hear the ambulance and the police sirens coming. So that's pretty much why the orchestration is like that. Like I said, the orchestration is never a choice. It is what comes with the music when it's in your head.
Right. Well, all right. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll play this little excerpt now from your piece, The Giant Guitar. And thanks so much. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
That's the giant guitar. And
Yeah.
it's such a great piece, such a great piece. I've done this with a lot of different orchestras, and not a single time has the audience not loved it. It's really great piece of music, and I'm glad that we could do this together. And
Thank you.
again, Miguel, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
All right, let's add Melissa and Camilla to the show again. Hi.
Hello. We have some questions for you, Maestro.
All right.
What is the biggest mistake or accident that has happened while you were conducting?
So the biggest accident it would have to be was actually my audition in Augusta, Georgia. I conducted the Shostakovich Symphony No. 5 in the second half, and the downbeat is very strong, and I gave a very strong downbeat, and at that very same downbeat, I snapped my baton. My baton is made out of wood, so it's possible to break it. And if you snap it with a lot of tension, it flies over your head very, very high. And that's exactly what it did. And it landed sort of in the first row of the audience. And so for a split second there, I was wondering, well, what should I do? Should I stop and should I start over, or what is happening? But I decided, of course, to go on. And that was to not go on, of course. I had to stop. And I turned around and I talked to the audience. I said, look, folks, I'm sorry, but freeze. There you are. All right. Melissa, can you
I can kind of hear you. You cut out a little bit.
hear me? Come
In
here.
and out. It's in and out. Are you having the same thunderstorm?
Yes, we are having quite the thunderstorm coming through here, so we apologize for that.
Oh, Dirk.
Oh no, we lost
We just
Dirk.
lost Dirk.
Let's see here. We'll hang out and wait until he gets back, I think.
Yes.
Let's see here.
I'm texting him. I'm sure he knows.
Let's see. Do you guys have questions for us about like any marketing stuff related to the orchestra?
While you're thinking of them, I want to tell you that if you liked that music you just heard by Miguel del Aguila, we are doing 2 more of his pieces in our Passion concert, which was in March, but we have rescheduled it for September 17th. So we hope you will join us at the Miller Theater on September 17th to hear some more fabulous pieces by Miguel, which we are recording. And welcome back, Dirk.
Hi.
Hey!
I am not entirely sure what happened, but it probably had something to do with that thunder that just came down here. But
Very
I'm
jealous of the weather.
glad to be back. All right, let's see. Where did we
We
leave
were
off?
at a question from Katie, who asks, is conducting opera more difficult than conducting a concert? And then we have a similar question. What has been your most challenging piece to conduct and why?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, conducting opera is quite different from conducting a concert. I think it's very, very fun. Of course, I mean, technically it's the same thing, but what makes it different is mostly the spacing of it. So usually in an opera situation, the orchestra and the conductor are in the pit. So they're below the stage, so to speak. Which for the conductor means you have your orchestra, you look down to see the orchestra, but you look up, way up to see your singers. And you have to be down here to conduct the orchestra, but up here so the singers can see you. So just logistically, it's a very different experience, which I happen to love that. It's really, really fun. The other main difference, of course, is that you, as orchestral conductors, we work mostly with instrumentalists. And here now you have a lot of singers in the mix. And there's just different things that singers need. For them, just like for wind players, breathing is everything. And if you don't talk to them that way, and if you don't breathe with them, it can be very difficult then. So yes, it's quite different for those particular reasons. And let's see, the second question was the challenging piece of music. Well, there's many that are very tricky, from giant Mahler symphonies to the Rite of Spring or something like that. But quite honestly, the hardest thing that I have ever conducted personally was a pop show. It was a movie. It was a movie called Gotta Dance. It was all these clips from the classic dance movies, Gene Kelly and so on. And it included the entire American in Paris ballet. And all of these things had tap dancing in them. And of course, the tap dancing came from the movie, not from the orchestra. So if the orchestra was off by just a split second, nothing worked. That was by far the hardest thing that I have ever conducted. So actually, let me pose this same question. What's the hardest thing you've ever done to a dear friend of mine, who is the concertmaster of the Duluth Superior Symphony Orchestra. She's also a professor for violin at the University of Wisconsin. And just in general, violinist extraordinaire. Please welcome to the stream, Erin Aldrich.
Hi.
Hi, Erin.
How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So let me ask you that same question. What's the hardest, most challenging piece that you've ever done?
Actually, it was a duo that a friend of mine wrote. It was to celebrate. I work at camp down at Indiana University, the IU Summer String Academy, and this was to celebrate. Oh gosh, it was like the 25th, I think, and he wrote a duo, and it was like a half-hour long, and it was these and it's another violinist, William Harvey, and he writes these really incredibly complex and intricate works where it's like a sextuplet of notes against 7 notes, and it's all of this really insane, but it's deeply meaningful and really amazing. But to piece it together, just it was painstaking, and it does help that he was the composer, so he could teach it to me. But it was a really amazing piece, but probably the most difficult I've ever played.
Yeah. Some that does sound very hard indeed. We got a question here from Lorinda in Augusta, and it's sort of a mixed question between conductor, but I thought I'd give you the question because you play in so many orchestras. So the question is: it seems that every maestro has a different style of conducting. Since most of the musicians play in several orchestras, how do they know what the maestro wants from them during a concert?
That's a great question, but I think a lot of I have to think about that one. I think part of it is when you've done it so much, you go on automatic pilot. And part of that is conductors have specific gestures. And especially when you get to know a conductor, you already know what they're going to expect, and you've got a rehearsal period where they're also vocal about it. But I think the conductors, and especially you're an example of this, where you give so many signals without having to use words. You're so good at communicating through gesture that we pick up on that. And believe it or not, we are watching. We do watch you, and so we pick up on your gesture, and then we react to that. So, and I think, everybody's gestures are different. And so you kind of learn that and you pick it up as you go.
Yes, yes. And it's probably fair to say that, I mean, the longer you work with one conductor, the easier, of course, it is to understand that person's specific body language that they use. Right. And here, of course, a question made for you. What is the role of the concertmaster? Why is the first chair violinist, do they have a more important role than any other first chair in the orchestra?
I think in a way, everybody's important in an orchestra. I mean, really, if you look at it, we have a hierarchy, but really an orchestra isn't one without every person in it. That being said, I kind of act as a conduit for Dirk, and I can help lead, and I can help move, and especially when things are complex. Sometimes people will of course be watching Dirk, but then also watching me as well. And I have to make sure that I'm absolutely in line with what Dirk is doing, and that I'm helping to show what he needs us to do, and tempo and that sort of thing. There's a lot of also behind the scenes stuff that a concertmaster does. I go to all the auditions, and in meetings and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a full circle job.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we talked about difficult pieces to play. I know you're a very, very, very versatile musician, and you play a lot of different styles of music. And I know you have one kind of unusual style prepared for us today. You want to tell us what you're going to play for us?
Okay, this is a favorite of mine. It's a lot of fun. It's a piece by the composer Henri Vuitton, who is also a violinist. And it's a piece called Souvenir d'Amérique. And it's a theme and variations. And I'm not going to tell you what the title is in English because you'll pick it up in about 60 seconds.
All right. Well, here she is, Erin Aldrich, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, let's see. Melissa is here. Camellia is there. Aaron is frozen. Okay. Well, it was frozen just at the right second, it seems. Aaron, you probably can't hear us, but thank you so much. Wow. Great, great, great. Oh, there she is. No, she's not. There you are.
Hey.
Hey. You were gone there for 1 second at the very end. But wow.
Oh no.
What a great performance. Thank you so much, Aaron. It's so great to have you on the show, and thank you for sharing your music.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. All
right. So maybe let's just take one question, and then we should probably move on to our next guest, since it's getting late already. Here, look at that. So let's see. I got a question here. Why are classical music pieces divided into movements? Do they serve a specific purpose? That's from Jeff in Duluth. Yes. So oftentimes longer pieces of classical music, like symphonies or concerto, they are divided into different movements. And in a symphony, for example, in a classical symphony, each movement usually represents a different mood. The first movement is there to be an opener. It's usually fast. It means wake up, here we go. The second movement is mostly a slow movement, an adagio that's often very pretty, sometimes sad. That's followed by a faster movement, a dance movement, or a more fun movement. It's usually a minuet or a scherzo. And finally, the last movement is usually in a classical symphony is a very fast movement, probably the fastest, often a very short movement too, sort of a thank you for coming type of movement. And it's been great to see you. Now, we have another very, very special guest now. Oh, actually, sorry, we have one more thing before we go there, because we have one question here from Philip in Aiken. He asked me to explain how a basic key change works. A little technical, but to answer that, you really have to have a piano, and I don't have one right here in my studio. So I made a short little video to explain how that works, how a basic key change works. So here we go. The vast majority of music that we listen to today is based on 3 chords. We call them 1, 4, and 5. 1 is our home key. 4 wants to move away from home. And 5 pushes us back home. Because the 5 chord in a way determines where we go, we call it the dominant 5th chord. And you can make that feeling of wanting to go home even stronger by introducing the interval of the 7th. Here's the 7th. It really pushes us back there. There's hardly any other way that this could potentially be resolved, that could go. So the interval of the 7th has this amazing quality to make any chord feel like a dominant 5th chord. And therefore, it's a great way to start a key change, or what we call a modulation. For example, I am here in C major. And now if I simply add the interval of the 7th to my home key of C, it itself really wants to go home, but its home, of course, is F major. So that helps us make happen a really basic modulation from C major to F major. So the key to a simple modulation is to make a chord feel like the dominant 5th chord that wants to go home, and the interval of the 7th is a great way to do that.
Another basic way to modulate is to simply introduce the dominant fifth chord of the key that you want to go to. Let's say you want to go from C major to G major. All you have to do is introduce the dominant fifth of G, which happens to be D, into the mix, and it will take you to your new home. Here is D, and we're in a new home of G major. And the same is true here. If you add the seventh to that new dominant fifth chord, it will make the feeling of modulation, of going to a new home, stronger. Here's the seventh. So a basic modulation relies on the dominant fifth chord to reach our new home.
So there it is, a very, very basic explanation of how that works. I'm excited for our next guest here. I had the pleasure to work with him a few months ago. Clayton Stevenson is an incredible pianist, still a very young guy, and at the same time, he's also enrolled for something completely different, but we'll ask him about that. Please welcome to the show, Clayton Stevenson. Hi, Clayton.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a great honor.
Oh, please. It's great to have you. Thank you so much for coming. Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're such a young guy, an amazingly accomplished pianist already. And right now, where do we find you?
Actually, I'm still at Harvard right now, if you could believe it or not. So I've been studying at Harvard University for the past 2.5 years. But as I've been doing that, I've also been studying at the New England Conservatory in this dual degree program. So basically in 5 years, I get my master's degree in piano performance, and I also get a bachelor's from Harvard, which I'm currently doing economics in. So,
of course, because, what else would you do with your time? Yeah, wonderful. We have here a question that I thought that came in that I think you might be able to answer. And I actually, in a way, it's very interesting. The question was, is it sometimes hard to get a soloist to come to a place for a shorter piece? And I'm thinking that is an interesting question. So you, for example, would you travel across the country to go play with an orchestra to just play, let's say, Rhapsody in Blue, 19 minutes or whatever it is, and that is it?
This is a very unique question.
Isn't it?
Just because the timing of the pieces isn't something you necessarily think about a lot when you go perform. Obviously, all opportunities are immensely good for you, so you want to do as many as possible. But I think when you're looking, especially for me, when I have so much to do, like my schoolwork and stuff, I have to look at how much time I'm investing into these performance opportunities. And so even for shorter ones, that may mean that I get to practice maybe half of the time I would for practicing for a concerto. And then, so, that means I have more time to do my studying. So in some ways, having a shorter piece is not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, you want to play as much as you want to showcase yourself. But I think if you're just getting that opportunity to perform, that's enough of an opportunity. So I think all opportunities are welcome.
Oh, wonderful. If we can music,
I would go.
Right. If we can music, we want to make it. By the way, we are Clayton. For those of you up in Minnesota, Clayton will be with us actually in Duluth next season. We'll be playing Chopin 1, I believe, together. Very much looking forward to that, Clayton.
Oh, me too. I've already started looking at that and working on it. So I'm looking forward to working with you again on that.
So here's a question that I thought, who better to ask than you, because you are a wonderful pianist and you're enrolled in economics of all things. So the question is, do you believe what is written concerning that studying music, studying classical music improves your math skills?
I would say that it doesn't necessarily directly improve your math skills. I think that while I've been learning all of these different skills together, I kind of feel that all of them kind of connect together in some way, just because you can find useful tools from music to apply to math. I think one of the biggest things that I apply using my skill set from piano is just being able to analyze a score. I think I've been taught so much from an early age just to look at a blank piece of music, and then from there you can get all these different ideas about what to do, what to try. Maybe this place is a very special part, so we're going to use a special sound here. And I think compartmentalizing these different aspects of a piece is very important in math as well. When you have to simplify different equations and stuff, you have to kind of visualize what you want to go to. And I think so maybe it's not directly improving my math skills, but in some way the concepts and just the way of thinking is definitely improving my math skills a little bit.
Yeah, I very much. I think there's a lot of similarities between the two worlds. Very much so. This question here I thought was fun. How much freedom do guest artists, so you in this case, have in choosing what to play and what to wear?
I think usually what to play is definitely up to the conductor. Like for Mr. Myers was the one who suggested we play the Gershwin Concerto the last time I went to Augusta to play. What to wear is ultimately up to me, but I'm not a very fashionable person, I say. So just a black suit and a white shirt is enough for me. But I think one of the things which is a little bit more nuanced in picking is the different choices you want to make in the piece. You always, when you go to a new setting, you're like, is the conductor going to be, very strict about what tempo he wants? He already has an idea of this piece going forward, or you can add a little sets of pieces yourself. I think when working with you in Augusta in the Gershwin Concerto, I was so thankful when you let me, do my own little improvisations on top of the actual written music. So that was a relief for me, because I know that a lot of conductors would not like that. They would like you to stay to the score. So I think a lot of the stuff is up to the conductors.
Yeah. So talk to us just a little bit, please, about the Lang Lang Music Foundation that you are a scholar of, and this in preparation. We have a little video here that I want to show with you playing a duet with Lang Lang, and talk to us a little bit about how this all happened and how you got in there.
No, I think Lang Lang has always been one of the biggest inspirations for me. I remember when I was 5 years old, he was signing his book at Barnes and Nobles, and I went there to meet him. And I just remember, oh my God, I want to be like him one day to perform on all these big stages. And it was crazy because I got the opportunity to meet him just a couple months later in Germany, because he had his first summer camp for kids from all around the world. And that was the first time I was able to learn from Lang Lang. He taught me, and from that experience, I think I just learned so much from him. He seems like this guy who's very energetic, always having fun. But when it comes to the music, he actually can pinpoint exactly where your problems are. And thankfully, he has this big mission to help out other kids like him, because he was not so lucky when he was growing up, and he didn't have a lot of opportunities to play music in China. So he kind of wants to provide this for the kids in the United States. He set up a lot of different programs, such as the Keys of Inspiration in New York City, which gives free piano teachers and a free piano studio to all these underprivileged public schools in those areas. And those are places where I was growing up in, and communities that I know. So having a tie to those communities and being able to learn from him was just so much. And now that he has bestowed me with so many opportunities to perform and just all these skill sets, I can kind of bring that out into the communities myself, and now start doing a little bit of outreach. So
that's wonderful. That's so great. What are we going to hear here? It's the Turkish March by Mozart, but in a four-handed version.
No, this is a quite interesting rendition. Yeah, Lang Lang wanted to. This is one of his signature pieces, of course, and I'm sure once you hear the piece, everybody will know it. But he really wanted to do something with collaboration, and he added his own little, jazzy spurts in there. You can hear a little bit. So yeah, we were having a lot of fun while we were playing it.
This is so great. Well, here it is, Clayton Stevenson and Lang Lang playing some Mozart plus, let's say.
Sure.
That's so great. It's really fun to watch. I mean, obviously the piece is fun, but the two of you are just having such a grand time playing this together. It's really fun to watch that.
No, and I think it shows what we strive for when we go to performances. We were just having so much fun connecting with the audience. I think just the aspect of just enjoying the music is what we're there for.
Absolutely, and you could see like the music is happening that second. You look at each other and let's do this. All right, yeah, wonderful, just great.
I think the instantaneous reactions kind of give you a little bit extra inspiration while you're playing as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Clayton, thank you so much for taking the time to being on the show. Wonderful to see you, and we're very much looking forward to welcoming you to Minnesota in just a few months.
Thank you. I'll be working hard for that. I promise.
Well, we know it will be amazing. Thanks, Clayton. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
All righty.
He's unbelievable.
Isn't he fantastic?
Amazing. That was great.
Yeah. He really is. All right, Camelia, what's next?
Yes, we have a couple of questions about programming. So the first one is, who decides the concert program? And then more specifically from Roberta in Augusta, given the vast amount of orchestral music, both old and new, what goes into your process to select the pieces you present during the concert season?
Right. Great question. Technically, of course, it's the music director who decides the programs. But more often than not, that happens with a lot of input from other people. Many orchestras that I've worked with have something that's called the Artistic Advisory Committee, for example, a committee of usually musicians, some board members, that I run my programs by them, and they give me some feedback, input, ideas, and so on and so forth. Oftentimes, I get ideas too from musicians that just come to me and say, what about this piece? We really should be playing X, Y, Z. But then ultimately, of course, the season is put together by the music director. And there's a good reason for that. And that is kind of points at Roberta's question. And there's so many considerations that need to go into the creation of a program, but also into the creation of an entire season. Obviously, the first question that I always ask is, what does the audience want? What do I think they want, at least? What do they want to hear? What do the musicians want to play? And what do I think, even if they don't know it, what would they enjoy? What is a great piece of music that they might not know, but that I'm pretty sure the majority of people will enjoy? Very often, of course, you have to ask the question, will it sell? And if it doesn't sell, that's okay. But you better make sure that there's something on the program that will sell, because ultimately that's how we survive. And I'm very, especially when I program music, either that's new or pieces that are unknown, not necessarily new, can also be old, but do I think that they will enrich the experience of the concert experience, but also, will they enrich the lives, so to speak, of the audience that listens to it? And when you make a specific program, but also a symphony, you ask yourself the question, will a certain piece of music fit the rest of the program? And then, of course, you ask yourself, will this program fit what else is on the season? Another consideration, I always look up the last time a piece has been performed before I program it, because you don't want to repeat yourself too quickly. There are certain pieces that it's okay to bring them back after a number of years, but in general, you don't want to repeat something that you've just played. And then, of course, a very important question is, can I pay for it? To program a Haydn symphony with 45 people in the orchestra is a lot cheaper than Mahler's Symphony No. 8 with a gigantic orchestra and a couple of choruses on top of that. So those are all very important things that go into the creation of a program, and that I actually think a lot about when I make the season. You hear my dogs? Something's happening down there. not sure what it is, but talking about programming, I mentioned there's often an artistic advisory committee involved, and of course, I don't program in a vacuum, and I get info from different sources. And one of the folks that has been really fantastic to work with over the years is my good friend Richard Robbins up in Duluth, Minnesota. He is the chorus master of the DSSO and has conducted choruses all over the globe. He's a professor for choral conducting at University of Minnesota, and I've run many a chorus program by him as well. So welcome to the show, Richard Robbins. Hi, Richard. Hey, we can't hear you. No, I cannot hear you. No. Camelia, can you hear him?
I cannot.
Okay.
It doesn't say it's muted?
No, I unmuted him, so he should be on. Okay, we give you 1 second. All right. Well, he's going to restart that. Well, maybe that will give us an opportunity to quickly look at all these questions that are trickling in here on the comment feed. Unfortunately, it's not easy to do all these things at the same time. So
here's a question from Donna in Duluth. What are the different speeds, like adagio?
Oh, yeah. Well, we have in older, let's say, older music, classical music, the classical period, folks usually used Italian terms to describe the tempo that they wanted. And it goes all the way from largo, which means slow, very slow. That's sort of the slowest Italian term that we use, to presto or prestissimo, which is the very, very fastest one, and anything in between. And then sort of in the romantic area, people start to get away a little bit more from these Italian terms and use their own sort of language. A lot of German terms, French terms that showed up sort of in this time. Okay, I see we have Richard down here. Let's see if we can hear him.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
There he is.
Yes.
All right.
Score.
Richard Robbins, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. How are you doing, Dirk?
Good. Very good. Thanks for joining us. So I have a few questions here that came in specifically for you. And the first one I want to throw at you is, how does orchestral conducting differ from choral conducting?
That's a really good question. So I think one difference is obviously the ensemble that you're working with. So with choral music and choral musicians, often if you're working with the choir regularly, you're focusing on choral repertoire. So sometimes you might be dealing with voices alone. Sometimes you might be dealing with voices and piano. A lot of our most wonderful works in the repertoire are for chorus and orchestra. Those are sometimes high points in a composer's output. I think that when a conductor is approaching chorus, you have the opportunity to be rather intimate and nuanced, and sometimes you really work more on shaping the text than you do certain musical articulations. With an orchestra, I think because of the difference in rehearsal time and also the complexity sometimes of what the ensemble is doing, your gesture often is larger. And more specific sometimes to the articulations of the different instruments, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Here, this is probably my favorite question of the night from someone in Atlanta.
Okay.
In Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, what does the chorus think about while they are waiting for an hour before they come in?
That's awesome. That's a great one. That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
You're just trying to keep your eyes open, Dirk. That's what you do.
That's what I do on the podium.
No. Actually, from the standpoint of the choral singer, for a performance like that, I think a wonderful thing for a symphony chorus is that they get to appreciate what the orchestra and the conductor of the orchestra is doing in a different way.
Mhm.
So when the chorus is up there for Beethoven 9, and we did a Beethoven 9 just a few years ago with you, and we've got another one coming up. I really think that the chorus appreciates watching that musical journey. I mean, it's a long time before they get up to sing, but there's so much wonder and beauty in Beethoven 9. I also think that the chorus needs to understand why Beethoven brings the chorus in at the moment that he does. It's a revolutionary move. It influences and impacts everyone who follows him. And when we are preparing the work, often I try to deal with some of the music that they'll hear beforehand, so that they really can appreciate and understand that, so that when the chorus comes in, it feels like the culmination and not like something that's just been tacked on at the end. I think that makes a difference for the chorus, and our chorus in Duluth really loves to watch your work, and they always get a lot out of that experience.
I'm going to ask you the same question that I answered for myself and that I also asked Aaron, because I think it's a fascinating question. What's the most challenging piece of music you've ever conducted?
Wow. Okay, so you probably approach some of your conducting repertoire in the same way. There's stuff that is somewhat technically challenging, right? And so, stuff where you've got all kinds of meter changes and all of this stuff. But for me as a conductor, chorally, I find that it's harder to prepare the chorus to do really great counterpoint, if like really effectively and really clearly. So there's a piece I conducted several years ago in Houston by Elliott Carter. It's called The Harmony of Morning. No one knows this piece. It's for a chamber orchestra and a women's choir, and the counterpoint is just all over the place, and you're having, like, the singers are watching, and you have to be so sort of confident and ready for them to sing. And then for me personally, I find actually that pieces that have a sustained sort of intensity level, particularly if it's very intimate and it's sustained for a long time, I find that to be very taxing, because you have to keep the energy of the ensemble in front of you. So like even some like those long John Tavener works where it's like one chord, for 3 pages, and you just have to keep everyone going, and it's a real full body experience for the singers. So that's where I would go with that. That's a great question.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Now, you're the chorus master for the DSSO. Of course, you also work with choruses all over the place, but for somebody who works with a symphony chorus, tell us a little bit about that. That's an interesting challenge, because you prepare the group for someone else ultimately. And tell us a little bit about that dynamic. Like, how does that preparation look like for you?
Yeah, it is different. And I think that there are conductors who gravitate towards that work, and what they appreciate about that process is, first of all, that it's a collaborative process. I really love trying to get a sense of what the orchestral conductor's musical vision is, so that we can kind of fit inside of that. With regard to the actual preparation, what I tend to do is I try, unlike what I do with my choruses, my standing, like academic choruses and other community choruses that I direct, where I'm the one conducting. I tend to practice with a lot of variation of like tempo, a lot of variation of style and phrasing, just to get them really reactive to what they're seeing, so that it doesn't feel like it's over rehearsed, where it's sort of baked in. I like to sort of get it right, like you're about to put it in the oven, you know, but you don't quite put it in the oven, and then you let the conductor of the work take it over, and you want the singers to be responsive to that. And I think it's super fun, because you rarely as a conductor do you really get to go back and forth with someone like that.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we have a little video clip prepared here from something that you and I have done together in maybe 4 years ago. I think it was
2016. Yeah.
2016. So what are we seeing? What are we about to see?
Well, I think we've got a clip from the very famous Carmina Burana by Karl Orff, the first movement, O Fortuna, which is a piece that everyone recognizes, even if they know nothing about classical music. But for folks who love symphony orchestras, it's always, you know, on their top 10 list. This movement is about how fate is as variable as the phases of the moon. The person with everything is going to get knocked down at a moment's notice, and it's just a brave and bold work.
It truly is. So thank you so much for being on the show. It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
And here is the first movement from Carmina Burana in the DSSO and DSSO chorus performance from 2016. Thank you, Richard.
Take care.
All right, Carmina Burana. Folks, and this takes us to the end. That's all the time we have today. As I mentioned in the comment section there, we will go through your questions that have not been answered, that didn't make it on the show, and Camila and Melissa will help me to go through those, and we'll come up with some short and hopefully good answers to your questions. So thanks to everyone who was on the show: Anastasia and Dennis in Athens, Georgia, Miguel del Aguila in probably Seattle, I believe, Aaron Aldrich in Duluth, Minnesota, Clayton Stevenson at Harvard in Massachusetts, Richard Robbins, also in Duluth, Minnesota. And of course, ladies, thank you so much, Camelia here in Augusta and Melissa in Duluth. Great to have you two here as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks. We will hopefully be back for real on stage with those wonderful symphony orchestras. And until then, keep following us on our Facebook pages. We'll try to stay in touch as much as we can. And thanks for joining us today. And we will see you very, very soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.